Okay, hi everyone. This is Andrea Lunkos again. I'm going to get us started because we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty, but we're working on the back end to resolve that. So just want to welcome you today. We are here from Jobs for the Future Center for Racial Economic Equity, and we're excited to have a conversation with some experts that we'll introduce in a few moments. And here's some findings, a kind of sneak preview of findings from research that JFF will be putting out this summer. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off our slides. For those of you who may not know, the Center for Racial Economic Equity is a new center at JFF, and we are focused on accelerating Black economic advancement. We do that through a number of ways, but our kind of key goals are around disrupting occupational segregation and eradicating the Black-white wealth gap. We do that through research, which we'll hear about today, as well as advisory services in the field, working across the learn and work ecosystem, and lifting up our findings and insights through our thought leadership, and also working across a network in the field. So we're excited to have you here for this conversation and as part of that growing network in the field. I just want to give a little bit of context on why we're talking about technology today. I'm sure many of you have seen all the headlines recently in the news, but want to give a little bit of framing and context around Black learners and workers specifically and their position in the digital economy. So we have a couple of stats here up on the screen that I'll just highlight quickly. We know that the workforce, Black Americans make up 12% of the US workforce, but only 8% of employees in tech, in the tech sector. And across all industries, technology jobs are expected to grow by 14% when we look ahead. We know that Black talent in those roles is expected to grow only 8% over the time period there. And also, regardless of industry, 92% of jobs will require digital skills today and in the future. So we really want to ensure that we're positioning Black learners and workers for success in the digital economy as it is growing. And we know from research that we've done at JFF and with our partners who are mentioned here, that there's a lot of work to do there. So I am going to also share some images here that kind of capture what we know is a very volatile market currently with the tech industry. We know that throughout the pandemic, there was a lot of investment in tech jobs, and now we're seeing some shifts there in terms of layoffs and other repercussions that are captured here. So, lots going on that we want to dig into today to hear from our panelists, as well as from some of the research that we've been doing on the pipeline and the pathways to careers in technology for Black learners and workers. And I should add that this is really part of our effort at JFF to be thinking about disrupting occupational segregation. And I'm going to now, I think Michael is on, so I'm going to turn it to Michael to just kind of continue providing some of that framing as we go ahead. Can you, Michael, are you on?
I am, and Andrea, thank you. You framed it beautifully. So I don't want to belabor us. I'll jump back in when it's time to bring on the panelists. But before I turn it over to Lois to share some of the research that we found, I'll just say that we think that access to digital and IT is for this population is so critical as the economy increasingly is a digital economy with whether it be commerce, remote and hybrid work. It's just absolutely critical that we have access and success in these fields, which is why this was one of the early priorities for the work that we did when we were an initiative and now a center. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Lois Joy, to share some highlights of the research that Andrea mentioned that we partnered with the National Student Clearinghouse on. Dr. Joy.
Thanks, Michael and Andrea, and welcome everyone. It's great to see you all today to be helping us think about and explore this important topic. We're really excited today to give you a little bit of a teaser of the research the team and I have been working on over the last year to look at the landscape of Black learners in IT post-secondary programs. So why this research? Well, we know that there's a link between the educational system and occupational segregation by virtue of what program students have access to, the support they have there, and their degree attainment. So next slide, please. So in this research, what we set out to do is to identify institutions with strong Black learner participation in IT, participation, retention, and completion. And we are focused in this research on associate degree attainment and also credential attainment, which may be 1 year or 6-month credentials through the post-secondary system. And the IT we focus on was at the very highest level, including all the different fields. And we wanted to go a little bit deeper in that, and you'll see some of the limitations in doing that. But we had a great partner with the National Student Clearinghouse who made available to us some restricted use data that allowed us to map out where Black learners are participating in these programs nationally. And we were able to look at this over time, longitudinally. And we also paired that with some qualitative analysis where we looked at those schools that were top performing to see how they were supporting their Black learners. So next slide, please. So just to give you the key findings, and then the report will dig much deeper into this, but the first one is the pathway to tech careers through these community colleges is not strong. So for an example of that, only out of the 1,000 schools we had to look at, only 400 had at least 10 Black learners enrolled in their IT program. When it came to Black women, it was only 150 institutions out of 1,000. When it came to retention and completion, very few colleges, less than 10, met these our retention and completion outcomes. Now, it's interesting that the programs that did meet the enrollment targets were largely in the South. That's perhaps not surprising in that a large share of Black learners and workers live in the South. Community colleges serve their community, so it's not unlikely that we would find that large enrollment in the South. Then when it came to what colleges doing to support Black learners, we had a small sample, but what was interesting to emerge is that 2 strategies seemed to be surfacing. One was a race-neutral approach, and one was a race-conscious approach. So I'm just going to take a few more minutes to give you a little bit more context about the research before turning it back to our panel. So next slide, please. So this next slide shows you what I was talking about here. So we start with, we've identified about 1,000 schools, post-secondary schools that offer the associate degree in IT or a credential in IT. And then you can see here why we are describing this pipeline as struggling. So we have 400 schools with 10 Black learners. And then when we look at it by gender, the numbers go even down, 350 for men, and then 155 had female. And we use that 10 Black learner criteria. That was partly for confidentiality reasons, to use the NSC data. But it seems like it's a good cutoff too, to just give you an idea of where we see some more robust enrollment. And again, you see here that in the top 15% for this enrollment, 75% of these schools are in the South. Now, next slide, please. Now, when you look at those 400 or so schools that are enrolling 10 Black learners, this shows you what we see for enrollment, retention, and completion. So average enrollment was 18% Black learners. That's about 56 learners. For retention, and retention is fall to fall retention in the IT program, we saw about 38% on average. And then for completion, and we looked at a 6-year completion from 2015, 6 years out, we saw an average completion of 13%. But what I want you to look at here is that the medians, especially for enrollment and completion, are lower, which means that most of the schools are below the average. There were some outliers at the top that pulled us up the average. And the other thing to keep in mind that's very important is these averages were calculated only for the schools with 10 Black learners. So if we were to take this average over the 1,000 schools, of course, the average would be much lower. And the other thing I want to point out too, especially about enrollment, you might look at that 18% enrollment and think, well, it seems to be representative of Black Americans across the country. But the thing here is, one, again, this average is only over schools that have 10 Black learners. So nationally, it would be lower. But also keep in mind is many community colleges are in communities with much higher percentage of Black learners. And so to only have 18% is actually an underrepresentation. So what we dig into a little bit in the report is to say that you really need to look at the share of Black learners in the service area of the community college to really understand if there's under or over representation. But overall, the pipeline isn't strong. If we're going to rely on this pipeline and pathway for Black learners, it's gonna be a slow train. So finally, we did pair this with, you can go to the next slide, speaking with schools, because some schools did rise to the top. We talk about that in the paper. We were able to contact 5 of them. And what we found is, we think this just interesting finding that some schools have a very race neutral approach. 1 of the 5 had a more conscious approach. There are limitations to this. We only talked to 5 schools. They were mostly in the South for the obvious reason, because most of the schools at the top were in the South because of that enrollment, and they were small. So this is something we'd love to explore in a larger context. But still, let me give you an idea of what the kind of things we heard. So if you go to the next slide, here are some quotes we heard that we really started to hear as this race neutral approach. So the last quote there, these are 3 different, from 3 different focus groups. The last one there, I definitely want to stress that we practice inclusion for all learners. So there was a real pushback against speaking about race specifically, but more like we include all learners and we focus on what they need. But this was not focused on their racial aspect. And this then here's the quote from the more race conscious school, which was a really different approach, and that's in the next slide. And this school took a very data-driven approach to their support for Black learners. So they did surveys, they looked at administrative data, and they disaggregated all that information by race to see where do we see that support is needed, or where do we see success that we can elevate to help all of our students. And they also at the school were conducting a lot of professional development for faculty and support in that way. So we go more into that in the report. So I hope that kind of whets your appetite to dig deeper into this with us. We're really excited about getting our full report out later in the summer and the fall. So thanks very much. I'll turn it back to Michael.
Thanks so much, Lois, and I want to thank our partners at the National Student Clearinghouse. My understanding is Doug Shapiro, the Executive Director of the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, is on the line. So thank you, Doug, for your partnership. I'd like to invite our panelists. We've got a stellar group of panelists today. Dr. Aisha Franklin, President and CEO of Benjamin Franklin Cummings Institute of Technology, is with us. Waymond Jackson, CEO of EdFarm, is with us, and Dr. Allison Scott, CEO of the Kapor Foundation, is with us to help us make sense of these findings and the recent headlines and the volatility in the labor market around kind of the tech workforce. But before that, how about some intros? Why don't we start with Dr. Francis? Why don't you lead us off? Maybe a little bit about you and your organization to contextualize kind of how you're entering this space today. And then we'll go to Waymond and Dr. Scott.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you to JFF for the opportunity to be here. I am Dr. Aisha Francis, and the college that I lead is called Franklin Cummings Tech. We are a 2-year technical college based in Boston, and we serve folks from the greater Boston area, and our mission is to deliver a transformative technical and trade education that leads to economic advancement. We do have computer technology, information technology programs, and networking system support, cybersecurity, and software development. And I look forward to engaging in the conversation.
Thanks so much.
Hey, good afternoon. First, thank you, Michael, and then thanks to our friends at Jobs for the Future for this opportunity for us to have this conversation, and definitely honored to be among this panel with this group of leaders. My name is Waymond Jackson. I get the opportunity to serve as the CEO for the Education Farm. And over the past 3 years, this is an organization that we've completely been focused on eliminating barriers to access for underserved communities that prevent them from accessing those digital skills and entering pathways to technology-related roles. We're set up really uniquely in that we really are a P to 20 and beyond approach. We have a K-12 focused initiative, which is EdFarm, and it's truly focused on equipping educators in schools and then the community with those digital skills and professional development that they need in order to be able to provide students and learners with access. And then we have an initiative called the Propel Center, which I love reading the data and the insights that you all are sharing with us. It's focused on elevated learning and access for historically Black colleges and universities, all 101. And so looking at those insights that you all are bringing out in there truly point to a lot of the things that we're seeing, and especially as it uniquely relates to the South. So look forward to getting that conversation even more. But thank you all for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Michael and JFF, for hosting this important conversation. I am honored to be on this panel. My name is Allison Scott. I'm the CEO of the Kapor Foundation. We are based in Oakland, California, and we focus at the intersection of racial justice and technology. We're driven by the notion that tech holds great promise to close longstanding inequality, but its potential will only be realized when the tech creators, the entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders reflect the diversity of the United States. So specifically what we do, we operate STEM education programs for high school students of color. We produce research on the tech landscape. We support organizations and initiatives advancing equity in CS education, pathways to tech jobs, and diversifying the tech workforce. And then we also invest in seed stage entrepreneurs designing products to close gaps of access and opportunity. So excited to have this conversation today with you all.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for your leadership and the work that you're doing in this space. And I want to jump right in. I'll be honest, the findings of this study were alarming to me. I think it's so important that we have access and success in this field. But enough about me. I want to know how you all kind of processed, what are these findings and the trends and headlines around the tech industry? Like, what does that mean for Black learners and workers? And maybe, Allison, I'll start with you. What are the findings, current trends, headlines related to the tech industry mean for this population?
Absolutely. So I think that there are, I thank Lois for sharing some of that really important data and excited for the full report to come out. So there are a couple other data points that I wanted to highlight for this conversation. So one that we're very concerned about is the persistent lack of representation in K-12 computer science education among Black students. So at the earliest stages, Black students still lack equitable access to computer science courses. There was recent research from the Joint Center that shows that Black workers remain underrepresented in apprenticeship programs. So even as we see apprenticeship programs being a really unique and novel, hopeful opportunity for diversifying the tech sector, we still have to pay attention to the fact that Black workers are underrepresented and also underpaid relative to their peers. And then there were some data points that were in one of the earlier slides that I think is important to kind of contextualize this as well around, I think we hear a lot about the headlines of layoffs, and the other asterisk is that Black workers, workers of color and women have been more likely to be impacted by the tech layoffs. However, if we think about this from like a 10-year horizon, tech employment is projected to grow twice as fast as employment, other overall employment, and especially in some of the areas like data science, cybersecurity, and software development, where Black workers continue to be the most underrepresented. And then the last stat that I think is really important too is that we've actually seen a decline in the investment in Black tech entrepreneurs who are more likely to hire diverse teams and create products that positively impact Black communities. So overall, these seem like very troubling statistics for a state and nation that is a global leader in tech creation, and equally concerning if we think about the impact that this will have on communities of color, racial and gender disparities in the design, the creation, and the deployment, we think will have a significant impact on society more broadly.
I appreciate that. So I'm curious, Waymond, if you have thoughts, because you also mentioned K through 12, not to lead you, but like just check in with you there.
Yeah, I'm willing to be led. No, I think that one thing that I would hate for, our communities and organizations like ours and the ones that's represented here, and then the underrepresented communities, would be to take the media headlines and the layoffs and then begin to think that I don't need to go into those fields or spaces. I think the points that Allison brought up about where the trajectory and the growth is actually forecasted to go is what organizations like ours should be, really pointing out to individuals. It's about this long-term economic mobility of the best equipping you with the skills. What I really started to think about was how, technology, unlike any other industry, definitely in the past, when you think about moving out of, an agrarian society and then, mechanical and all those different things, technology is truly like it's become invasive into every single industry, unlike any other time before. And so in the South, we think about, we grew up around a lot of steel plants and things like that. Well, those didn't necessarily make their way into corporate as much as technology itself is transforming jobs, whether those jobs be in a factory, whether those jobs be at a bank, which banks think of themselves as like they spend more, in their technology budgets now than any other place. And so it's really important that digital skills, I love the stats, you'll talk 92% of jobs, require some form of digital skills. And so to Allison's point, when we think about this K-12 space, oftentimes communities like ours, we don't have the amount of people in those, persisting through in college and everything else, is because we don't get started early enough. And so it is truly important that, at every single point that you have to have this type of exposure to students and teachers at the K-12 level so that they can be strengthened to actually go into those fields as they persist through high school and into college. And potentially not even into college, but the apprenticeship route and other boot camps as well.
That's a nice segue, Dr. Francis. Like you are kind of on, you span in some ways, but like on the post-secondary side, let me go to you for your thoughts around kind of the implications of these findings and current trends in the industry.
Yes, absolutely. We are at the post-secondary level, and we invest quite a lot in early college, because what we do know is a lot of communities, particularly Black communities and also other communities of color, that are underrepresented because of a systemic disinvestment in education. And then that has these downstream effects, which means that folks have less access to something that we don't necessarily think of as disposable, but disposable income to invest in their education. And so I wonder, when I see those stats. I wonder how many people are coming to software development in particular through some of the coding camps that are offering free education, Per Scholas, Resilient Coders, the Year Up kind of programs. I wonder if that is a siphoning off of students who might go to college but are enticed by a program that's free, even Google IT certificates. So, that it just makes me wonder where are people. I know that we in Black communities are high users of technology, and so there's definitely interest. I think there are disconnects in how there could be the professions that are behind the technology, the gaming, the daily use that we have. And so there's one area of disconnect, and another area of, I think, additional interest, at least for me personally, about the racial demographics of some of these other nationally replicated programs that are, purporting to get people into the fields that we're talking about, into these tech jobs.
Yeah, that makes me think about really super important observations. I thought a little bit about kind of the pipeline as well. Programs like Per Scholas are amazing, but as a scale strategy, right, there's a smaller number of learners that are going through those programs. And one of the reasons why we felt like it was really important to focus on the kind of the two-year sector is a scale strategy, right? Like getting your numbers there. But I really appreciate kind of us needing to kind of wrap our heads around kind of the pipeline through some of these other alternative channels. At the same time, really wanting to get your thoughts here on what leaders can do across the Learn to Work ecosystem to address kind of what the study is at least suggests is a pretty anemic pipeline, which again, to me, is really alarming. I don't know if you all saw in the Times yesterday, there was this article about this young man, Black man, that was misidentified by facial recognition technology and spent 6 days in jail before, and I was just thinking about, we know the algorithmic bias, and it just to not have Black learners and workers in the pipeline for me is just it's just alarming. But anyway, going back to like leaders across the Learn to Work ecosystem, what should they be doing and thinking about to increase the strength of the pipeline? And Dr. Francis, why don't I start with you there?
Sure. I think we should be doing a lot more bridging between early college, high school programs, AP programs, things that really increase access to professional options younger. And that colleges can do that work. Colleges can certainly partner with school systems and also with companies to make it much more transparent and tangible. I think there's a whole challenge that we have with naming in higher education, where it's not always clear what information technology is. We have a tendency to name things in ways that are that put distance between the practicality of a thing and of a profession and the studies that are required. So I'm really encouraged by the ability for someone in high school to graduate high school with an associate degree or with industry recognized credential in tech. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to capture the minds of our high school students and to really then encourage them to follow on with college-based education in some exciting ways.
So here, let's go to Waymond and then Allison. And I know that we need a cross-sector approach. So if we can work in your thoughts around kind of employers or other partners, Allison, I know that you all invest in kind of mission-aligned kind of tech work. So just go to maybe Waymond on what leaders across the Learn to Work ecosystem can do to kind of address kind of this pipeline challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think one, intentionality. I think there is what I am beginning to see, and I think Allison mentioned it earlier. We were thinking about this thing around design, or when we're talking about AI, we're often, Dr. Francis mentioned how we're users of technology in the Black community. But design of programs is also extremely important. And the more that you have leaders like Allison, myself, Dr. Francis, and others who know these communities, or from these communities, actually know the right solutions that should be in place. But you have leaders who are designers of what those solutions should be to work on this intentionality of building this anemic pipeline that you mentioned. I also saw one of the things in the chat around the funding. The funding then of those efforts that these intentional leaders are designing to impact these communities, we have to build into that. And kudos to the work that Jobs for the Future and others in Kapor are doing to fund those types of innovative solutions in these communities. But the more that we can, be very intentional about how we design programs, look at small things that are working. I'll just point to something in Birmingham. When you start to think about, we have this work that we're doing on the K-12 side. Then you look at another partnerships program that we have here called the Birmingham Promise, which provides Promise scholarships to students from a 99% African American school district that then go to a 2-year college or a 4-year college. We have statistics that say that these students are either going to go to a 4-year HBCU or a 2-year historically Black college here in the state. And so as we design programming that then is able to be with this student from the point that they were in K-12 to then where they go to at that 2-year spot or that 4-year institution place, and put those wraparound services around them, then you really start to see a long-term pipeline being developed so that Black learner, they're being exposed to it earlier on, and they're also getting exposed to what those career opportunities may be, not just coming off of this pathway without going into a 2-year or 4-year institution as well. Because we also know that, there are statistics around, although while we may be pointing to this space of, it's all a skills related economy and ditching the degree, we as African Americans know that there's economic mobility that's also associated with a college degree at some level. So we have to put those individuals who we're serving in position, to have the most economic mobility that they can possibly have as it relates to when they finish.
Appreciate that. Allison, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think great points have already been made by my fellow panelists. And I think the only thing that I would add, 2 quick points, one on the industry leadership side. So I think much more robust and sustained investment in developing, hiring, promoting Black talent and Black leadership across tech is what's needed. And in our most recent research report, The State of the Black Tech Ecosystem, it really demonstrated that we really haven't seen progress in both representation within the large tech companies as well as within leadership within those companies. So despite, lots of efforts, I'll put efforts in quotes, despite lots of efforts, we haven't actually moved the needle. So that again goes back to the point for like very sustained and robust investment. Love what Waymond said about investing in the leadership of folks who come from those communities and understand how the solutions should be designed. And then there's an accountability piece. Right now, we lack any sort of accountability for like moving the needle on Black representation in tech. There's no way to hold companies accountable. If they say they're going to increase their, the number of Black workers that they're going to hire by X%, there's no current mechanism for holding them accountable. And then on the other side, which is related, I think there's a lot that can be done in the policy space around both policy and regulation. So Dr. Francis mentioned education. I think there's a lot of work that can still be done in computer science education policy around passing legislation that focuses on how do we close racial equity gaps and how do we focus specifically in communities, states and communities that are have significant populations of Black students to make like some real policy change and structural change and investment in those communities. And then more broadly, all of these pieces are connected. So we think of we launched a tech policy initiative that had 9 policy priority areas. So everything from education to workforce development to AI accountability to investment in startups. Like there's more work to be done on a leadership side from a policy perspective as well.
I appreciate that. I cannot help but asking, so on the policy recommendations and on the And I tend to agree with Waymond on kind of the importance of leaders being proximate to the community and having kind of an intimate understanding. But you all know that there are headwinds, kind of political headwinds around even addressing and naming issues around kind of race, particularly around issues. We've got the anti kind of CRT legislation, the attack on DEI, kind of programs, practice, and policy. So I'd just be curious, Allison, just your thoughts there around how we should be thinking given those headwinds.
It's a really good question, and it's actually a question that's coming up in almost all of our conversations that we're having, whether it's at the state level in California on computer science education policy, or if we're talking about DEI within companies. So I don't necessarily have an answer, but I think my only suggestion to the community, to this community, would be that we can't allow the what we're seeing as backlash to hinder our progress. So we have to say what we mean. So for example, in computer science education, we're we still have racial equity gaps. Let's not water it down and just say it's important that we pass legislation for all students to have access to computer science. We need to say it's important that we address racial equity gaps that continue to affect Black students. And we know that there will be many challenges that will come our way, but I think we just have to be clear about what we're standing for and why.
Any thoughts there, Waymond and Aisha?
I definitely agree in calling it out and naming it. And one thing that's, we can have all the legislation, all these things out there that exist. But one thing that's not going away anytime soon is this issue in workforce development and supply of talent. And so when you look at that and you understand that companies are going to continue to have a need, then you know that there's definitely going to be a place and a space for this type of work. And then really being able to, hyper focus in on who are in those seats and the types of talent and talent of color and underrepresented communities being served in those spaces will continue to be important. And we should not shy away from that.
Thank you.
And I'll just add that as your research lifted up historically Black colleges and universities, I'm happy to see that as a HBCU graduate myself. And I think that this has been a time, the past 3 years, of increased visibility for other classes of minority serving institutions. And I hope that that's a good thing, that maybe in the policy arena and perhaps in the philanthropic arena, we'll continue to see almost carve outs specifically for MSIs, because we do know that a disproportionate percentage of our tech talent is being educated in technical institutions that have HBCU status and MSI status. And that's important to really point out in an era where folks still sometimes challenge the validity and necessity of minority serving spaces.
I'll jump in with Dr. Francis. I mean, it's a no-brainer when you think about HBCUs, and I think the number of the STEM graduates that are produced from HBCUs is somewhere between 25% to 30% just from HBCUs. And if you think about what that means to the actual population, like that is an accelerator if there never was, a definition of an accelerator. And so when you actually think about the investment of how do you actually enhance that and do more of it, it's actually a no-brainer from an investment standpoint.
Yeah, I agree and appreciate that. And one of the things that was a bit kind of challenging for me to kind of grok in the findings was the so many institutions, even in the South, not wanting to acknowledge race, right? And we have such strong evidence around kind of HBCUs that it actually matters. I need to move us to a question that I wanted to make sure we got to, and I want to also encourage people to put questions in the chat, and we'll go to those. Aisha, you kind of began to mention some solutions. You mentioned early college. Waymond, you also kind of got into solution space, but let's focus there a bit. Like, are there bright spots, and effective practices that you all are seeing that, are strengthening kind of pathways to tech careers for Black learners and workers. Waymond, why don't you start us off there? Bright spots, effective practices, and then we'll go to Allison and then Aisha.
I was enjoying the formula that was working, like sandwiching me in between these two brilliant.
Trying to move it around.
Just from being involved in workforce development of the past 10 years, the intentionality around barrier reduction for underrepresented communities who we actually want to see in technology related roles. So whether that shows up, through a boot camp where, we run a, Pathways to Tech boot camp for adult learners, being able to say that, hey, it's no longer good enough just to have, an accelerated program, for Black learners. In order for them to succeed, you have to have the wraparound services that go with it, whether that's success coaching, constant success coaching that they have access to, mentorship, a barrier reduction fund so that they can have transportation stipends, whatever it may need to get them there. Oftentimes we see people in our community who are mothers working 1, 2, or 3 part-time jobs. It's not enough to say that they need a stipend or earn to learn while you're doing that. So the apprenticeship model, being able to put those things in place so that the people that have the skill and ability and that you're moving through this pipeline, they're actually able to go through the pipeline and still have take care of themselves and their families and what they're doing. And then I would say, the immersion of technology just into the community with some of the work that Allison talked about, code clubs like we're doing, like at the earliest of ages, really being able to expose students to, from an awareness perspective, computer science and what comes with learning to code. It's not just becoming a developer, but it's the critical thing in the problem solving, all those things that it opens up a world of ability for.
Thank you. Allison, you want to go next?
Sure. Sorry, I couldn't remember who was next. So I think a couple bright spots. One, if we think about the national landscape, I think it's great that we've gotten so many new investments in alternative models to tech jobs. So in the National Apprenticeship Act, in California's investment to advance apprenticeships by serving more than 500,000 apprentices over the next decade, and then the CHIPS Act. So I think these are important investments on a national level to strengthen our tech workforce. To Waymond's point, I think a lot more has to be done, and there are bright spots and examples of how to do these really effective programs that reduce the barriers for Black workers. But I think we have to make sure that those investments are really targeting racially inclusive apprenticeship programs, given some of the data that we've already seen about disparities in apprenticeship programs. And then also we'd be remiss, this is not necessarily a bright spot, but we'd be remiss if we didn't say, we also have to make sure that employers are actually moving more towards skill-based hiring, and that there's some evidence that that's actually moving the needle for Black workers. And then I'm just reiterating what Waymond said, because it was one of the points I wanted to make sure to uplift in this conversation, that there are so many nonprofits doing really, really great work that are helping to inspire young learners, mid-career learners, and I think representing the philanthropic community, representing government leaders, we have to think about doing more for building scalability and sustainability for these organizations, and really investing in the programs that are on the ground serving students really effectively.
Thank you.
Well, Waymond and Allison had a lot of good bright spots to share. I'll just point out one that we haven't mentioned, which is it matters who's in front of the room, whether that's a classroom or a virtual room. And so we do need more investment in near-peer educators and mentoring for people who are interested in tech careers. I think of organizations like He Is Me, which is doing a lot of work to encourage more Black men in the teaching profession. And, we know that that's a part of the success and retention as well, kind of who is at the head of the classroom, and then how inclusive our curricula really are. And so that's just something else to think about as we're looking at best practices from some of these nonprofits. How much can we replicate and scale the good ideas that are already in circulation?
I love that, and I can't help but make a plug. So one of the things that the Center for Racial Economic Equity is doing is we're wanting to stand up a network, and so Allison is on our advisory committee, and thank you, Aisha, is joining that advisory committee. We have a convening on June 13th, and it's exactly designed to do that, to pull together organizations that are working in and around this space so that we can kind of join forces. So definitely look forward to kind of continuing the conversation with those groups. And one of the things I wanted to also mention, kind of Waymond was mentioning the wraparound supports. And so one of the research kind of forthcoming research products that we'll have through the center looks at wraparound supports, and it looks at the wraparound supports that are that have some efficacy for access and success in digital and IT careers. We're trying to take kind of that focus, so hope to be able to bring that research kind of to the community. So I want to really thank you all. I want to give you a chance to to say to the group here, as we sign off and get to their questions, what is a big priority for you right now, and what is something that you think that we should all be thinking about? So let's start with Dr. Francis this time, and then we'll go to Allison and then Waymond.
Sure. This is something that we're really working on, is more behind the wall education and more education of folks in the recovery and reentry space in tech, and how do we knock down barriers to increasing people's ability to enter those professions, because we know that there's so much to gain when we have diverse voices at the table in terms of people with diverse experiences as well.
Thank you. Allison?
Was that next, Michael?
Yes.
Sure. I think something that's just top of mind for us as an organization, I think I would love for all of us to collectively think about is what is the role of all of this new emergence of artificial intelligence and what that means for not just our society, but also the tech workforce and education, to really think about how does that impact Black students and Black workers. So there's lots of data from like McKinsey about how automation will more greatly impact Black workers, but I think we should be thinking big picture, 10 years down the line. What are some of these big implications? Michael, you mentioned the story about facial recognition software and the impacts on communities of color. What are all of the things we should be thinking about so we can include that in our programs and our policies and our investments?
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now let's go to some questions, and I think my team is going to help. And I see a question here from Nicole Tenson with HBCU 2020. And Nicole, I don't know if you're available to come on camera and ask your question. I will see if I can do it justice if you can't. So she is asking, what advice do you have for attendees who serve Black learners who may be apathetic about working in tech or developing tech skills? What practices and outcomes have you seen to be effective in developing interest in this field? Thank you, Nicole. Anybody want to take that one?
Well, Waymond, go ahead. I'll piggyback after you.
Great question. The creator side of it, man. I mean, especially with students, what we've seen from the work that we're doing through our K-12 program, whether it's middle school students, and then the work that we're doing with HBCU students, their ability to create with technology is amazing. And so I think there's a ton of work that we can do as leaders to talk about, the exposure component of what actually is considered a tech job or a tech role. But a part of even our focus, being able to talk to people around, you want to be equipped with, the tech skills or the skills to get a technology job, but you also want to be equipped to create technology jobs of the future. And so, as Allison pointed out earlier, when you think about if you're creating those jobs, then you're more likely to employ individuals who look like you, who are, in the same spaces that you've been in. And so, being able to have that type of conversation and just placing the technology in their hands and letting them know that it is, something that they can easily go into and be creators, because they're already being creators through social media and all those different things. And it's, the tech roles, whether it's product management, project management, all those different things, user experience. It truly is going to take the lens, of individuals, from those communities, because they are so customer service focused on it. We're the consumers of it, and so in order for it to be successful, you have to have the individuals who are proximate to it to create it.
I'd love to add just one more piece to that, if that's okay. So in addition to like access to the jobs, creating new jobs and technologies, exactly as Waymond said, I've also seen that a lot of young people get really excited about understanding how technology is impacting communities of color. So it's like the social impacts of technology. So some students might be really interested in just the coding aspect, but other students are more interested in starting the conversation about like the article that you just mentioned, Michael, and saying, okay, so what does this mean? Like, what are the technologies behind the facial recognition software that's being used? How is it disproportionately impacting Black communities? And that can be like an entry point into a whole variety of jobs that are tech related, but not necessarily software engineering.
Yeah, no, I love that. So there's one last question we can get to, and Aisha, you kind of mentioned this, but it says a third of Black men. I don't know if I don't have a site for this stat, but in the question it says a third of Black men have been incarcerated. How do you feel about having them in the tech world? So, Dr. French, do you want to start with that? You mentioned something about that.
Sure, absolutely. I think of the challenge that's posed here as one of, we really need to expand the workforce, and you do that by picking up folks who have been placed on the sidelines. And so there's certainly a large number of people, again, in recovery, in reentry space, and returning citizens who we need to make sure that have a home in the tech sector. And there are multiple ways that can be done, and where there are statewide and local policies that make that more difficult, I think those need to be challenged in the spirit of allowing folks who have served their time to have a broader access to a full range of careers that can provide them with the economic security that is required in order to live a full life.
Thank you, and we need more time because we've unfortunately run out of it. So I want to thank you, Waymond, Aisha, and Allison. Thank you so much for your time today, for the important work that you're doing. Want to definitely keep in touch. Want to thank the people who joined us today. Want to thank the audience. Our partner, National Student Clearinghouse, I want to thank you for your partnership, and also Capital One for their support for this work. We have to wrap, but let's keep in touch on this. And again, just appreciate all that you're doing for the Learn to Work ecosystem and for Black learners and workers. And we think that there's very, very little that is more important than the work that you do. So thank you. And with that, unfortunately, we need to sign off today. So really appreciate you. Thank you.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.